I'm glad they're out there then. And that's that. And we're done. Okay. It says, yes, Miss. Oh, you can't see it. Okay.
All right, everybody. We are live on Create Waunakee page. Good morning. We hope that everybody is starting to tune in today. My name is Sylvia Guerin, and this is Natasha Lutz. We are from the Create Waunakee committee and specifically responsible for this initiative called Waunakee's Home. We wanted to tell you quickly what this idea or where this idea came from. The point for us is to show what Waunakee is made of. I remember when I moved here about 10 years ago, I was quite surprised to see how many different backgrounds and cultures I ended up finding in Waunakee. So I think the idea is for us to show you that there is diversity, especially if we look at diversity with a broader range. If we look from race, ethnicity, religion, different backgrounds and culture, this is the point of the idea, the initial idea. By inviting our guests for telling their own stories, we are going to get to know people that live in our community. We are going to learn about new places, and we are also going to learn about Waunakee itself. So the goal for us is to have guests from afar that moved to Waunakee and chose this place as their home, but also invite guests that will talk about the origin of Waunakee, how the history of Waunakee came by, and those traditional families from our community. So I'll pass the words to Natasha now, and she will introduce our first guest.
So today for our interviewer, we have Mike Heller. He owns Red and White Wine Bar on Main Street and also hosts the Mike Heller Show. For our guest today that is being interviewed, we have Cassandra Punsel. She's an active member of Waunakee and a lifelong interest in issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. She is a devoted mother to her daughter and to many others that know her as Mama Cass. Now we'll start with an video.
All right, that's as we get underway, a little video that is super cool to look at some of the pictures. I'm Mike Heller. I am the interviewer today. I do a sports talk show, but my guess is we're not going to talk a whole lot of sports. Cassandra, welcome in this morning. I'm not going to ask about the Brewers games being canceled or COVID-19 in that regard. So I think it's really interesting in our conversations prior to this to talk about your family of firsts, and I want to get to that. I also want to get to what Cassamistic is, and we'll get it because I'm not exactly sure. I think I have an idea, but let's start at the beginning. You've been in Waunakee for a while, but I want to go back to where you're from, and that's Lake Ivanhoe and Lake Geneva. And for some people that don't know much about them, two very unique communities. We're familiar with Lake Geneva, maybe less so with Lake Ivanhoe.
Yes, well, some people may be familiar with Lake Geneva as kind of a, we used to joke growing up that it was almost a suburb of Chicago.
Sure.
Historically, it was a wealthier vacation type town for historically wealthy white Chicago people to come. And there used to be laws on the books there that the beaches were for whites only. And this was years and years ago. And because of that, affluent Black families from Chicago also wanted a place like Lake Geneva to come in summer and vacation and all of that. So what they did was created Lake Ivanhoe, which is in fact Wisconsin's oldest Black community that nobody's ever heard of. I say that all the time because it never fails that people just never heard of Lake Ivanhoe, which is a really unique, it's more the size of like a bigger neighborhood or one of our Waunakee type neighborhoods that we have here, except that all the streets are named after famous Black people from history, and it's very, very communal. So, and technically my home that I actually grew up in was halfway between Lake Geneva and Lake Ivanhoe, which in a lot of ways is very symbolic.
So your father's side of the family is Black, your mother's side of the family is Mexican. I'm curious, in the conversation that we had, when did you first recognize that you were diverse?
That's a great question. I actually have, on my mother's side of the family, she was one of 9 kids. And of all of her brothers and sisters, not one of them married and had kids with other Mexicans or even other Latinos. Everybody married and had children with Black, white, Asian. So I grew up thinking that was all very normal.
Right.
And one of the cool things about that is nobody's culture was submissive to any other culture. It was just normal to kind of embrace everything that was happening, regardless of whose culture it was coming from. So I grew up thinking that was just normal until I got into public school. And I think it was and I went to Lake Geneva, of course, and I think it was about 2nd grade. That was the first time that I realized that not only was being half Mexican and half Black, first of all, being mixed at all was kind of a new thing, but people were typically used to Black and white. Being Black and Mexican was just unheard of. So that was one of the things that I learned when I was in 2nd grade. And that's when I started getting some, racist type drawings on my desk at school and things like that. So that was the first time that I found out that being mixed was not okay. And especially being mixed with 2 minorities. Sure.
When you remember back on that, are those early memories of kind of understanding how the world was maybe going to work? Was it sad? Does it make you angry? What emotions were attached to a young grade schooler seeing that or feeling that for the first time?
I had the great fortune, was very blessed with a family that taught me, in spite of all of that, compassion. With regard to the boy who left the drawing and the racist remarks and stuff on my desk, one of the things that I remember my dad telling me is, not that it was excusing the behavior, but that boy is going through a situation and his dad is not around and your dad is. And my dad was very involved in my life, Girl Scouts and all kinds of stuff.
Sure.
And so this boy may be looking at your situation and seeing that your father is around while his isn't. And so this is maybe kind of a way for him to lash out. So those were the kinds of lessons that they taught me. It was still, I still learned those things were not okay. I just was taught basically hurt people. Yeah. And that we could find a better way to deal with it. And back in those days, and one of the things that I loved about growing up in a community, a true community like that, is when things like that came up, my parents, my grandmother, whoever, we were at whoever's house it was, and we were discussing it, and we were all sitting down talking about it. And then you get it past it and you move on. And I can tell you, I won't name the names of anybody, but I can tell you, I'm to this day still friends with some of those very same kids who were not so nice.
And it's interesting, your father helped you get there, but to treat intolerance with tolerance. Mm-hmm. And does that diffuse? I mean, you're obviously had a lifetime of experience in that regard.
I think so. One of the things that I also learned from my mother's side of the family is, with all the mixed cousins and everything, I grew up feeling nothing but loved by my grandparents. both of my grandparents. That's all I ever knew. I did not learn until much later, as an adult actually, that my grandfather was not at all happy and even disowned some of his kids at first when they started marrying outside of their race. So that was kind of a shocker to me because I never knew anything but love. What I learned is it took when me and my cousins started to be born to kind of soften his heart and change his point of view.
Sure.
So I have never forgotten that either. Treating it with tolerance, but also when people have a face or someone that they know and care about, they just look at issues like that, like racism or diversity and things like that in a much different way.
How are the families different? Your father's family and your mother's family, obviously Black and Latino, certainly there are going to be differences, but maybe what is different and then maybe what is similar to how that creates you?
Well, both sides of my family are definitely very affectionate. That's could be a cultural thing, I guess. On my mother's side of the family, there's just a lot of people. There's just a lot more people.
Yeah, right.
They actually were originally migrant farmers. So they moved between Texas and Wisconsin. That's where they kind of originated. My grandmother actually also was a little controversial when she buried my grandfather. She came from a rather wealthy family in Mexico, and they were also kind of into politics. So there's some diversity there. And I also have on that side of the family, one of my second cousins happens to run one of the border security offices down in Texas for the Department of Homeland Security. And that kind of carries over into my dad's side of the family as well, because law enforcement. My father was the first Black police officer in Lake Geneva, and he retired just a few years ago from the Department of Justice for the state of Wisconsin. My grandmother, Gigi, his mother, was the first Black female correctional officer for Walworth County, which is the county where Lake Geneva is located. And when she retired, at the time, we just dug up this article, there were actually no other Black employees at all in Walworth County. In addition, my dad's only sibling, my uncle, Spike, he was a Chicago police officer. So in that way, there's law enforcement on both sides of the family.
Yeah. So I teased this a little bit earlier. What's Cassamistic? Yeah. I've kind of been saying this for years, but I always say it's hopelessly optimistic in even the craziest circumstances. I guess that's another thing that definitely comes from both sides of my family. This kind of sense of humor, this kind of in the face of crazy nonsense, in the face of what looks like complete obstacles to whatever it is you're trying to do or go or whatever, that you're just it's all gonna work out anyway. I remember years ago, a perfect example of this is my now former husband, and we're still good friends. I had worked at Kraft and I had gotten downsized, first wave of downsizing. And I remember him saying, for example, this is a very good example of this whole thing. He was saying, oh my goodness, we're gonna live in a cardboard box. And I just looked at him and I said, are you kidding me? This just means God's got something better for me. And that means something more exciting is on the way. You know what I mean? So that's kind of the thing. And so it's definitely something that my daughter's picked up and just carries throughout kind of everything, really on both sides of the family. I imagine that served you well this year for all of us, finding optimism in the COVID-19, in race relations, in protests, in some scary times. Finding that avenue, that pathway to optimism is important.
Definitely. It's funny, when the lockdown started and everybody was complaining, oh my goodness, we're stuck at home. I have a rare neuromuscular illness, and before I went into remission back in 2012, I was bedridden for the better part of 2 years. So my daughter and I, we laughed when we would hear people kind of talking about, oh, this is the worst thing ever and all this, because back in when I was kind of bedridden, social media was much less prevalent. I was the only one that was on this lockdown. and all this video chatting and Zoom, that didn't even exist back then, really. And so we were very isolated as a result. So when this lockdown happened, once again, her and I would joke, we could do this whole lockdown standing on our heads for like years on end because we've done it before. So yeah, that again, there's that whole Cassandra thing and the other one that we say a lot in our household, adapt and overcome mentality. So yeah, there's been a lot of challenges, but again, having a different attitude about it or looking at it from a different perspective, I do have a lot of hope, even in the face of this is probably one of the hardest times in our country for so many reasons. Everything, all of these things, the protests and COVID-19 and just race relations and so many different things, political divisions and all of that. But at the same time, I have so much hope anyway. Sure. Because I just feel like, me personally, I'm hoping, and I feel like personally that we're going to come out on the other side of this so much better in general as a country.
Cassandra, you've been in Waunakee for 12 years. How have you seen it change, evolve in relation to diversity?
Well, when we first chose to move here, it was strictly for the schools. Yeah. That was it. I knew the schools. I was very familiar because of my previous occupation with a lot of the school districts. And I just really knew they had a great school district. That was really all I knew. And it was great. Our neighborhood was fantastic, still is. And then my daughter got into school. And that's kind of when I saw, oh, okay, we've got some issues.
And that's where you came from, right? I mean,
yes.
You noticed it when you first went to school. So, so now evolve that into when Madison first goes to school.
Well, in a lot of households of color, and definitely in my own household and things, you're taught your history. You're taught a lot of history you don't hear in schools. And with her, between her and my cousins her cousins, my nieces and nephews and things, and not just them, but even my surrogate clay kids that used to hang out at my house and that. Yeah. I made sure that they all were aware of how far we had come, racially speaking, and that no matter what, especially with like my nephew and her, that no matter what, you don't let anybody prevent you from getting your education, period. And teaching them, this is what I went through and this is how we're going to get through it. And that's just what it boils down to.
It's been obviously a very challenging summer. You referred to it. It's been a challenging year with COVID-19 really kind of rearing its head in March and beyond, and schools not being in session, and again won't be as we begin the new school year. But the race relations, the protests, how do you think Waunakee has played through this, and being so close to some of the more at times violent protests in Madison? How has your view of this changed, or how is your view of Waunakee in this area?
Well, for the most part, I have to say I still really love Waunakee. A lot of the things that drew us here to begin with have not changed. There is, much like what I grew up with, it takes a village to raise a child. That is the truth. And certainly this village has literally played a huge part in our lives in a lot of positive ways. However, there's some work that needs to be done regarding race relations. One of the things that I have loved is that I've loved the opportunity to be able to speak with so many different people that politically, ideologically, and religiously are all across the spectrum, that they've been so open and welcoming as far as sitting down and having those conversations. So I think I've seen some positive moves. I think there's a lot of people that want more information. I think a lot of people that I've had the chance to sit down and speak with, it has taken it from this nebulous thing that they hear about on the news or reading a newspaper spun one way or another, when I'm able to sit down and we can discuss real things that are happening right here in our community.
Yeah.
And that for me is my focus. It's making this community stronger across all lines of diversity so that we can contribute to our larger society, because we're a great community in so many ways. We just have this issue we need to work on together.
One more quick thought on this, and then I want to get to something to finish. Social media, which you're very active in and want to continue to grow in that. It can be a double-edged sword, right?
Yes.
I mean, it can be incredibly nasty and at times anonymous and very out of bounds, or it can open dialogue and bring us together. How do you have more of the latter rather than the former, the divisiveness?
One of my biggest rules, I guess, personally, is that I do not engage in debates on social media. Not that I don't necessarily voice an opinion sometimes, or a small amount of an opinion. I would prefer to have conversations either face-to-face if possible. With COVID, that's not so easy.
Right.
Or, I personally have been involved in doing a lot of Zooms. I've done some one-on-one porch talks, things like that, because I think that for me, all of these issues, whether it's race relations or just politics or whatever it is, when you're having a conversation, I always try to decide whether I want to be right or reconciled, or meaning, do I want to change a heart or a mind?
Yeah.
Even if that heart or mind being changed is mine. And I don't think that you can adequately do that via social media alone. I think that it boils down to being right or wrong. And for the most part, that's what social media is good for. On the negative side is proving right or wrong and whipping out articles and all of that. But if you really want to get to know somebody, which is how you change a heart and mind, and you understand where they're coming from, it makes all the difference in the world in changing those hearts and minds, again, including my own at times.
All right.
Yes.
So Waunakee is home, our final five.
Oh,
So this is a little bit more rapid fire, final five questions or thoughts. Favorite, okay, so let me back up on this. Because there's tremendous diversity in your family, I'm curious to the answer of this, your favorite food.
Okay, there's two things I'm going to say. It's a childhood favorite. A lot of the kids know this one too. It's a comfort food that my mama used to make, migas. And also,
hold on. What is miga?
Migas.
Migas. What is migas?
It's made with corn tortillas that you kind of like cut up into bite-sized pieces and you fry them, and then you put scrambled eggs with them. Traditionally, or the way it was made when I was growing up, you put tomatoes in it.
Okay.
My daughter hates tomatoes. So I had to adapt it for her. So no tomatoes for her, but always, and you're gonna laugh, this is the only time I ever do ketchup on eggs. Ketchup.
Okay.
And for me, hot sauce.
And the second food was?
Well, it's a drink actually, it's tea. Tea, because that's a throwback to my Gigi.
Sure.
She was big on tea. She was very much a lady, and you always had tea or coffee with a cup and saucer, and it was a whole thing. And so once again, that's one of those things that all the kids in my life, they love the tea thing. And so those are my two big loves, I guess.
All right, Cassie, your most memorable job.
Oh, goodness. I do have to say housing specialist. Both with Dane County and with the city of Madison. I just learned a lot. I personally had a lot of misconceptions about some things. And so I learned a lot about people that need to utilize low-income housing. And I learned a lot of appreciation for my own family.
All right, a simple joy.
Oh, my daughter, hands down. I mean, that's just, just being with my girl.
Perfect. Favorite thing about Waunakee?
Oh my goodness, the community, the sense of community. When we had COVID, right before the lockdown, I had to get tested for COVID, and I was very, very sick. And that's when the porch drops started. People really just stepped up to make sure that me and my daughter were taken care of.
I know that about community owning Red and White, Kari, my wife and I, when we're closed down, the support in the community,
Yes.
just fantastic. So I
Yes.
totally agree with that. And finally, a motto you live by.
Besides the Cassandra
Yes,
and
well,
adapt and overcome,
right.
which is another one. Words have power.
Yeah.
They really do. I mean, and that's a biblical throwback, but words really have power. So,
Cassandra, Punsel, thank you. I mean, this is, we could do this for a while, but
I know.
in the interest of just keeping it kind of on time, thank you. It's good to
Thank
get to visit
you.
with you, and thanks
This
for
is
being
so fun.
the first
Yes.
to be interviewed on Waunakee is Home.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much, folks.
Done?
I really appreciate that. I hope you can hear us. Natasha, myself, and Mike and Cassandra have been trying to keep our distances doing this. That's why we're kind of doing these things in the background now. But I think that the hope we have with this first one is to start to give you a feel of, we all come from different places, and one of the places might also be Waunakee itself. But the biggest thing for all of us is to feel a part of this community, contribute to this community. And I think that this first interview has been a great example of that. So there are a few thank yous that I would like to do in my name, in the name of Natasha and the Create Waunakee committee. First one, of course, Cassandra. It's been fantastic to get to know you more. We've been connected even before this through the Wanna Talk Diversity. I think it is a fabulous idea. And so thank you so much for being our first volunteer to this, to be our guest. It's been fantastic. Mike, your talents, man, we are forever thankful, because we would be much more nervous if you weren't here to support us with us. There is a lot to learn with your interviewing capabilities there, and I'm sure that we will all get better at it with time. You're welcome back anytime you want to help us out with this. That will be a monthly initiative. There are a few other people in the backstage that we would like to thank very much today. First one, Tom Guerin, my husband, who is the video designer for the short video you saw from Cassandra earlier on. Mike Moe, he is the creator of our logo for Waunakee's Home. So if you don't know Mike, please, when you meet him, he owns that school for Taekwondo. Pat him in the back, because he created that logo for us. We have 2 volunteers in the group already. So Angelica Ramos and Bettina Johnson is our IT extraordinaire that help us with all these computers today. So thank you, ladies. Of course, Todd Schmidt, our developer in the village, opening the doors for us to bring these ideas forward. So thank you, Todd. Kylie West, so patient with me and Natasha throughout this process. She's in the backstage as well, taking care of this live. Thank you. To the Create Waunakee community, let's keep doing these jobs. It's been really fun, all these ideas that we are doing and connecting the people in Waunakee. For the audience that tuned in today, and for the audience that will hear this recording later on, thanks for supporting us with these ideas. We want to ask you all if you want to volunteer and help us to set up this interview series. Please come forward. You can help us in the backstage. You can help us by suggesting to tell your own story. We would love that. And also, if you have some skills like Mike to interview, we are also inviting you to connect with us. The next one, just to remind you, is already in line. We have another session on September 5th. For that session, we are going to travel together to a faraway place called Latvia. It's a small country in the Baltics, but with a very, very big story. So it'll be fantastic to learn about Latvia with Nadia Durovic-Myers and her mother-in-law, Margaret Myers. It will be a very interesting perspective of the one that came from afar and the one that welcomed with open arms. So we'll see you next time. Please tune in, and thank you very much again, everybody.
Thank you.